Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're looking at François Hollande's state visit to the United States. He's just been speaking at a press conference in the company of the U.S. President Barack Obama. Later, he'll be at the State Department in the company of the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry. With us to talk about it, Socialist Member of Parliament Axelle LEMAIRE, Conservative member of the UMP party Jacques, also a member of Parliament, Judah GRUNSTEIN of World Politics Review, and Philip GOLUB, who teaches at the American University of Paris. Axelle LEMAIRE, I just want to pick up on that point. That statement made last November by the French foreign minister, it came just a week before that invitation went out to the French president to come to Washington for this state visit. There was the sense that the French were saying to America, hang on, don't withdraw from international policy and from hitting these major hotspots and conflict zones.
And the invitation probably didn't come by surprise. I suppose it's also a way for the two countries to reassure themselves, for the United States to know that they still count in Europe, that they're still a major partner, probably the most important one, including in terms of trading. And for France, but also other European countries, to know that, yes, the US is turning towards Asia, but not only. And we know that we need the United States, for example, in the middle, to solve the Syrian crisis, to the problems with Israel, with Palestine, and still the US is a major player in that zone. So it's just that it's a new vision. We have to articulate each country's competence and zones of intervention. And we also agree on the fact that it always has to be multilateral. So either based on a regional intervention, but supported, backed by the United Nations, but always within the framework of multilateral negotiations. We also agree on...
Are you worried, though? Are you worried that the United States, after Iraq and Afghanistan, is withdrawing and that they won't be there to help out?
On Iran, we do share the same objectives, and we're both ready to take a tough stance if Iran doesn't follow up in the temporary agreement that has been found in Geneva. So I think we can find areas of common interest, but we'll just share the burden, as President Obama said, in a different way. I'm not sure if we worry, but I think this visit happens at the right time when each country needs to reassure itself about who does what.
Yes, I wish to say that this visit comes now, and it's good, I won't say, because of course states have relation, and there was a necessity that the two heads of states met, because we had this question of NSA, sorry, and we also the question of trade, the beginning of those negotiations between Europe and United States, and it will be very, very dangerous for both if the Americans want to push too far on a certain point, because this will not be certainly ratified by the French Parliament, especially in terms of cultural exception, as you know, and also in terms of what some European wants to open, which is the military free trade for equipment. And that will be very dangerous. So there is a need that they talk, and also, there have been some declaration in the past 3-4 days where some American diplomats were more than clumsy. They were even, arrogant. So I think there is a necessity sometime to talk, and I agree that this comes at the right time. But it doesn't mean that we agree. We don't agree on all subjects.
But all right, Jacques, I want to thank you, because I know you have to leave early. A reference there to Victoria Nuland's statement on Ukraine, where she used a certain explicative in a leaked phone conversation regarding Ukraine. She was speaking to the U.S. ambassador. Victoria Nuland, who's in the room right now as the U.S. Secretary of State, John Kerry, speaks in the company of François Hollande at a luncheon, part of the state dinner. Let's listen in for just a second to some of those remarks.
That we perhaps never would have marked without the special help of the French. We thank you, even now. Monsieur le Président, citoyens de la France, plus de 230 ans après, nous n'avions pas oublié votre amitié et nous chérirons à jamais notre alliance.
We have not
President Hollande and the
forgotten
people of France, more
your
than 230
friendship
years later,
and will
we have
forever
not forgotten your
cherish
friendship,
our
and we will
partnership.
forever cherish our partnership. We have not forgotten your friendship, and we will forever Ben Franklin cherish room. Our partnership. Not only did Franklin come to be called the first American, but he was also the father of the Foreign Service, and he was our first ambassador to France. It was also Franklin who wrote many of the first rules for decorum in America, and then from the moment he arrived in Paris, made every effort to break them all. I don't think we could get him confirmed by the Senate today. But what Franklin did to bring the best of the frontier spirit to France, Thomas Jefferson did in sharing France's cultural vitality with America. From Monticello's dome, which you saw yesterday, Mr. President, with President Obama, and which was modeled after a palace on the Seine, to the Paris market wallflowers on Jefferson's magnificent estate, to Voltaire and Rousseau's influence on the founder's belief in the consent of the governed and the connection between education and liberty, France has been an inspiration from our very start. For many of us, the bonds between our two nations are rooted not just in history, but also in family. We know about Vice President Biden's grandparents, the Finnegans, but with his middle name, Robinette, his family honored his French roots. My own parents, Americans abroad, first met and fell in love on the coastline of France in Brittany, only to be separated by the coming war in the late 1930s. My mother, then living in Paris, had become a nurse and was treating the wounded at Montparnasse. The day before the Nazis entered the city, she escaped with her sister ahead of their advances on a bicycle and proceeded to forage her way across France while German fighters were strafing them en route. And she made her way to Portugal eventually, where she boarded a ship that brought her to the United States and brought me here. When my mother returned to France for the first time after the war, Mr. President, I went with her, a very young child. And one of my first memories was holding her hand and walking through the bombed out and burned down remains of her family's home, which had been used as a headquarters by the Germans. And then in retreat, as Patton came through, they burned it and bombed it. When we walked through, only a chimney and a stone staircase stood up, rising into the sky. With my father in the Foreign Service posted to Europe, the France that we knew then was one that was still marked by the remains of war. My father once took me to visit the beaches of Normandy, a pilgrimage still to this day, where as a young child I could see still some of the detritus of war, some of the skeletons of Higginboats and tanks, and the burned out bunkers where I would even play. It wasn't until years later, walking those beaches, after I had been to war in Vietnam, that I fully understood the incredible price, the full price, of peace and liberty that both of our greatest generations paid. From the French resistance to the citizen soldiers who left farms and factories to make the world safe from tyranny. We are all deeply honored that a man who was willing to pay that price at that time, in 1944, is here today. 70 years ago, when he was just 23 years old, and the youngest in his unit, he flew missions aboard a B-17 over Normandy. Please join me in saying a special thank you to First Lieutenant Art Ordell of the United States Army. He's right here, ladies and gentlemen. We remember today that it really took an entire generation of heroes like Art to free France from fascism. And we remember that generations earlier, at our moment of maximum need, when the odds were against us in those uncertain days of the American Revolution, the United States might not have survived beyond our infancy without France by our side. We remember that when both our nations confronted existential challenges, it was our deep friendship, which is rooted in our shared principles and values, that carried us through. Still today, we give greater meaning to that friendship with our work together in almost every part of the world that is in conflict today, in Libya, in Syria, in preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, in the fight against AIDS, and in the fight to deal with climate change. So today, I want to ask all of you to join me in a toast. Monsieur le Président, alors que nous rêvions d'une nation libre,
when we had dreams of being a nation free, when men like Franklin and Jefferson gathered in Philadelphia to map out the road to liberty and independence, they knew that they would hang at the end of a British rope if they failed. Indeed, it was Franklin who famously said, "We must all hang together, or assuredly we shall all hang separately." And after the war, Jefferson said every man has two countries, his own and France. And today, we all say that our shared history and shared values had special meaning then, a meaning that they still do today. And then thanks to our work together throughout the world, our friendship will stay.
All right, you're hearing us toast at the State Department in French. John Kerry, the U.S. Secretary of State, explaining that he is of French parentage himself, in French for his guest of honor, the French President François Hollande, in Washington for that state visit. So is our international affairs editor, Douglas Herbert. The end of that toast, Douglas, we heard a reference to the American Revolution and the fight against the British at the press conference earlier. There was Barack Obama having to field questions from French reporters about who enjoys the special relationship now between Paris and London when it comes to Washington.
Yeah, it was a great question, wasn't it? The French reporter actually asking at one point, so who's the better friend? Is it France or the UK? You know, putting Obama a little bit on the spot there. He had the good answer. I have two daughters. I'd never want to choose between them. Hollande had a great answer, too. I have 4 daughters. Wouldn't want to choose among any of them. You know, it's interesting, but the fact that that question would even be asked now, and you'd have to take some pause to think, who's the better friends of the U.S., France, or the UK? 10 years back when we were in the cheese-eating surrender monkey era, do you remember that? The freedom fries era, only 10 years ago. You don't have to go back too far. That question you wouldn't have even had to pause to think about it. It was a no-brainer. But today, if you had to sort of have this overarching motif, this theme of the visit, it's been this sort of sense of taking everyone off guard and saying, wait, this is the Franco-U.S. relationship? This is France and America? Who would have ever thought they're actually best of friends? Now, fine, you take a step back and you say, they're friends in need. You add up the poll ratings right now of Barack Obama and François Hollande. I think it's 63% combined. So these are two leaders who do need each other on many different fronts. But that said, you can't deny, you could be cynical about maybe how they personally feel about each other or this and that. Their speed bumps, their road bumps in the past, François. But when push comes to shove, it is true that France is right now out there on many of the fronts where the U.S. just doesn't have a will or a way right now to really be present. And they said that perhaps the biggest visibility in this new relationship, as far as France concerned, is that role, that very, very present a clear and visible role in Africa, in the region called the Sahel, Northern Africa, fighting in that counterterrorism fight where we know the Americans just don't have any will to put boots on the ground. They're not going there. So as Obama does do that pivot to Asia, it's not that he's forgetting about Europe, but it's extremely helpful for him at this juncture in America's history and in France's history to have the French out there willing to play this role at a time when the British are as war-weary as the U.S. and where Germany, while saying on paper it would like to play a more visible, muscular global role, just isn't there yet. There's still a little political maneuvering to go, and there's still a little bit of convincing of public opinion in that country. So France is there. It's the clear and present ally right now, shoulder to shoulder, even though they're not exactly the same height, but shoulder to shoulder with the United States.
Just one more question for you, Douglas. Before we were speaking with Philip Golub, and he was saying how he was getting the sense that this visit was a little bit getting a short shrift, you might say, in the U.S. media. What's going to be the focus of this visit for the American press?
You know, I'm going to be the one, you'll have to revert right back to it. You know, people obviously were talking about François Hollande coming stag to this state visit, the Bachelor Hollande. There has obviously been, you know, I wouldn't say it's been overshadowing, but there has been obviously a lot of talk among ordinary Americans, average Americans who don't necessarily follow the intricacies of the Franco-U.S. relationship. This is an obvious headline grabber. It's obviously something people are going to talk about. A U.S. network this morning asking its viewers the question, who do you think François Hollande is going to bring to the state dinner? That's the type of thing that gets eyeballs on the screen. That's the type of thing that will get people who may not be inclined to be at all interested in a French president's visit to the U.S. a little bit interested. And once you get them beyond that question, perhaps you could then get them interested in the broader issues, the geopolitics that Barack Obama and François Hollande say they are now very much concentrated on tackling together. The issues Iran, the Syria, Sahel, Northern Africa, climate change, development, keep going down the list. They're really on the same page on more issues than I would have been able to count just a few days ago.
All right, Douglas Herbert, many thanks for that update from just outside of the White House. Of course, they don't agree on everything, do they, Julian?
Well, no, and I was going to say, as always, Doug's analysis is spot on. France is the clear and present ally right now. The problem facing any French president and any American president in terms of the French-American relationship is that, sadly, there is a very strong and ever-present latent fear, dislike, mistrust of the other. In France, there's a latent anti-Americanism that often peaks and surges when America does something that France does not like the Iraq War. In America, there's a latent mistrust of the French, which peaks whenever France either doesn't do what we want them to do or does something we don't. And so that's always something that's there in the background that has to be managed. It happens that right now, and not just right now, the truth is that in general and over time, the interests of the United States and France either converge, complement each other, or coexist naturally. And that's in most of the, however, there are these times where they don't. Right now, everything is going in the right direction, and so it's a good idea to celebrate these things when the stars align. But it's somewhat circumstantial right now as well.
Axelle LeMaire, is it tricky for politicians? Let's remember, it was 11 years ago that there was this the preparation for the war in Iraq, France saying no, and at the time in the UK, the then Prime Minister, Tony Blair, was nicknamed Poodle because of his following the U.S. Is there the danger when you're a French politician, if you're too glowing about the Americans, you too could be slapped as a poodle?
Maybe so, but I think the general feeling at the time was not so much anti-American than anti-war in that particular case. But just to say, there's one thing that hasn't been mentioned, I find it extraordinary, is the fact that President Obama and President Hollande are two progressive leaders. One is a French socialist in the tradition of French socialism. The other is an American Democrat. But they agree, they have a pro-business agenda, but they agree in investing in innovation, in education, in helping small companies. And that also help in shaping the framework for the future trade agreement between Europe and the US. So I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about that. And that actually is of interest to the American people because it could potentially create many jobs. So maybe the Americans are, for the moment, only interested about the love life of the French president, but the reality is that this deal could actually create a huge amount of jobs.
I think, ironically, more people call Obama a socialist than Hollande.
I mean,
Which is probably an insult.
Philip Gollum?
Well, I think beyond all of this, the more fundamental reality, I think, France was a major imperial power in the 19th century and remained a great power in the international system until when exactly? Until 1940, perhaps, 1939, and then de Gaulle tried to reestablish France's international stature by playing between the blocs, somewhat successfully, actually. But overall, France's global influence has been declining for a long period of time. Whether that's a good or a bad thing is a completely different issue. Within certain parts of the French elites, there's a desire to restore global status, and allying very tightly, aligning with the United States today, provides that kind of opportunity.
We have a comment on that from on Twitter from Tom saying the Europeans are big talkers about defense. Yeah. But seriously, it's only the British and French who step up.
No, but I think more fundamentally, so that's the particular French issue. There's a larger European issue, is that where's Europe in the world? Is Europe in the world? What can Europe do in the world? The European Union as a unit does not have a coherent voice in the world. It doesn't have it in Africa, it doesn't have it in Mali, it doesn't have it over terrorism issues, it doesn't have it on much anything.
Especially on the issues that are very important in Washington in terms of the strategic and security issues.
But even on the normative regulatory issues, there's significant disagreements within Europe. So one of the major problems, I think, today, globally, is that, speaking the Western alliance, all these words, the NATO alliance, what we're seeing today is the U.S. is moving gradually towards Asia. It's a gradual move, the pivot towards Asia. It's something which is dictated by the gravitational forces of the world economy and world politics. But Europe has been accelerating this process in a certain kind of way by being increasingly irrelevant, except in a negative way. Europe becomes relevant when the crisis in Europe gets out of control. Huh?
That's completely true, but President Hollande, and this is what is interesting, I think, is working both on the special partnership with the US, but also he's the most pro-European leader amongst the important economies in Europe. At the moment, he's the one who wants to push subjects such as youth and employment
I'm
growth.
not making specific critiques of
So he's working on both sides.
On that point, what's interesting is that you might make the argument that just at the time when the United States is talking about or has just implemented a national health care service, there was an interesting remark made by the French president at the end of the initial statements in that press conference, where they were both, him and Barack Obama were quoting the 19th century French thinker and politician Alexis de Tocqueville. And with Hollande, there was a little bit of a quid pro quo when he mentioned what's in the mantra of the French Republic, which is liberty, equality, freedom, liberty, and equality.
We spoke of how history unites us. Alexandre de Tocqueville is a reference that's always current in France, with two questions. How far can we go when it comes to equality? And how far can we go when it comes to liberty? The revolutionaries who sought American independence and those who sought a republic in France wanted to be as bold as possible when it came to liberty and as respectful as possible when it came to equality.
What's very fascinating is that, of course, the French Revolution was always more on the side of equality than liberty, and the American Revolution was always much more extremely defender of liberty over equality, and oftentimes that's where things get lost in translation when it comes to domestic politics. But one thing that I wanted to say, just in the question, this question of where's Europe, France, and America. Going back to Fabius's statement that America is receding, it shows that really what's interesting is that it shows that there's only one thing worse than an ever-present America to Europeans, and that's an America that's not present. the world becomes a much different and more frightening place when there's not, whether it's the United States or some other global power, someone there to fill in the gaps and to make sure that that the system works and harmoniously.
And that's where we're going to leave it now. I want to thank Judah GRUNSTEIN. I want to thank Axelle, LEMAIRE, Philip GOLUB. And just tell you, our coverage of the state visit will continue. Of course, next up will be the state dinner. We'll find out who François Hollande will be sitting and who Barack Obama will be sitting next to during that dinner that's coming up. We know that they'll have fine American wines and some singing by Mary J. Blige. Stay with us. More to come on France 24.